We'll actually do code review things. So welcome to code review UX sync for March 22nd. The only one up here was it. I met with Andy earlier today, and so it sounds like scope has been defined amongst Alex and Matthew, so that's exciting. I will put a link in the agenda to where that happened. So this is helpful to me. So I was excited to see this. I know you and Alex have both been ramping, I guess, with this in mind. And then Pedro had sent out some updates earlier. And since Alex is not going to make it, maybe it makes sense to sort of chat about like what do you see in terms of the restructuring? Like, how's that going? What do you need help with? How, like, what questions do you have now? And then how do we like keep the ball moving forward on that if that's sort of where we're going to go?
You're talking about the team restructuring, right? Not specifically the MR restructure.
No, I'm talking about the merge request restructuring effort. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like specifically to that. Like if that's going to be your scope, like then sort of what do you have in terms of questions and feedback on it now, or like what can I do to help? Or
So I had a meeting with Pedro about the MR restructure, and he kind of gave me a rundown of the project. And I kind of came out of it not really knowing yet where I'm needed on that, because they have some concepts, and he was kind of talking about taking those concepts and applying them to like issues and snippets and designs, and like changing the way we comment across all of GitLab for consistency, and talking about doing more robust user testing with the concepts they have. And yeah, it's interesting because it's just a really big project, and I'm not really sure, like, as far as the MR restructure, what are people wanting as far as timeline and getting these changes implemented, and what are the expectations around research and how much of it we're going to be doing. And yeah, I guess I'm going to continue to work with Pedro, but a lot of the information he gave me is not really actionable yet. At least I don't know what's wanted. It's more informational, so I've just been trying to digest, trying to look at current research, trying to look at the usability testing that went into the current concepts. And so I haven't really been too worried about execution yet. And I'll have other meetings with Pedro to like clarify that. But I'm just curious if you see anything that's like, we immediately need these things, or we need to get started doing X, Y, and Z right now. Yeah, that's kind of.
okay. Yeah, it's interesting that you brought up the scope. I also saw Pedro's updates to like epics and reorganization today, and left him a comment. A similar comment about scope, that like this feels like it just exploded on us. Like if you're reframing it this way, and makes it hard to understand like how code review can like do anything now, because like if you want to go and explore all these things, like that's a huge project, and we already like what I said in there's already so much divergence. Not that that's necessarily good, but like the work item sort of OKRs UI has like a totally different commenting field than issues do, and then issues and epics are different than merge requests because we treat threads as like very different like objects. That while I understand like wanting one unified experience, like that feels like a very lofty and ambitious thing that means code review is not going to do anything for a long period of time. So I agree. I think that helps that you're in the same place. I think both of us can push on this. I think what I want to see is that there's a path to engineering sometime in the next couple months, 3 months or something. Like I think that from my side, the restructuring has been long. We've been like talking about it for a long time, and it felt like we had gotten close to designs that were tested and validated and sort of like knew pretty much what we were looking at. And then all of the organizational changes, the people being gone, have just sort of slowed all that. And then now it feels like we're almost starting over. And so I don't want to do that. So I think, yeah, my ask to you would be like, let's push on getting code review to like something we can start working on and getting engineering involved in. Cause I anticipate it's going to take engineering quite a while to even figure out how to break this work down, right? Like the design is like dramatically different than what exists today.
Yeah, and that's another thing is like I know so for me personally, I don't care about issues, snippets, epics, designs because I'm the DRI for code review. So if Pedro wants to run around GitLab and try to figure out how to make these things consistent, that's sort of his job because he's a staff designer. But I don't want that to slow me down because I'm just focused on code review. But I know one of his concerns is that the research that was done was very not naturalistic. Like it's just a very narrowly scoped usability test with specific tasks, but doesn't really test a developer's actual workflow. And so what I'm worried about is getting caught up in endless cycles of robust research. And so what I'm wondering, from my limited knowledge of the MR restructure, is if there's like one minimal change that we could put under a feature flag or put out as like a beta to actual users and say like before we tackle this entire restructuring of the MR, does changing this one thing cause people to complain or do they like it? And to me, like one of the biggest changes that they're talking about is the comments tab. So having comments not be on the main page and the main page is just activity, and then having a comments tab. And so in my head, I'm like, well, what if we just did that and the comments tab, we didn't make a bunch of changes to like the UI of it, but literally just had it exist as its own tab, left the activity on the main page, put that under a feature flag and see if people like it. Or something similar that's like, because moving comments to its own tab, I always just think of GitHub and how simple their issues and pull requests are, and how everything's just sort of right there on that one page, the description, the comments. And so what you're doing is you're splitting all that information up. And so now you don't really have just like this one nice place that you get like your overview of the MR. You get your description, your comments, what's going on. Now we're showing the less important activity feed on the main page, and comments are now hidden under a tab, which maybe is great, but I don't know. And so if we just made that one small change and let people see that and use it in their workflow somehow, would that be better than going into like 3 to 4 months of really robust usability testing, you know, for the whole MR restructure. That's kind of where I'm like trying to figure out what's the best approach. And I'll probably have more conversations with Pedro about it as well. But curious if you had any thoughts about that.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't one of the things that like one of the things that like I like about the comments tab is that part of the problem with merge requests is that comments are divided in two places, right? Like they do exist on the overview tab, but they also exist in like the changes tab. And I don't know that the comments tab solves that for us because of the nature of you still go to the diff to like make comments on code. And so there's still like a version that will exist in changes and a version that exists in comments. But it does make it easier to know like in theory where you're looking. And I think some of the like grouping that was happening in the comments tab, you know, filtering based on personas or like people, or there had been like talks of tying it to like the review rounds concept, like make that like the central place. It's an interesting though like thought that you would land on an overview page and like that's not actually, you immediately like have to navigate again to like keep working, like you've got a second navigation all the time. Although I
Right.
guess if you follow a link, you're following a link to the comment and you land on the comments page, like you probably would never, right? It would just change where you navigate and then you would click back. But
Right. But if you always
uh,
avoid the overview tab, then why is that information there? You know, it's like
yeah,
I feel like there's two aspects of it, right? There's things that logically make sense, and I agree that splitting off comments and making them more robust and more feature rich could be a great move, and logically it makes sense. And then there's like the actual workflow of a developer doing 100 things at the same time and spending 8 hours a day in the tool. um I like try to balance between thinking about like what logically makes sense and does that also apply to a stressed out developer's actual workflow. Does it make them faster? Does it slow them down? Does it make them click it? Because it's amazing, like when I'm using software, it's like some things, some tasks are so annoying because just the amount of clicking and navigating you have to do to complete the task. And then some are just so easy. And I can't tell you which one is right and which one's wrong. Um, but I definitely want to try to think as much as possible about like actual developers' workflows. And that's why I'm not the biggest fan of usability testing with something this important, you know, like that
yeah.
has this many eyes on it. Cause there's just like, how are you going to find developers
You
that
can't.
represent there's just
Yeah,
so many different types and
yeah. You always have to take the usability test for things in code review like with a grain of salt because they're not. They're helpful for like glaring issues, but yeah, you still ultimately need to get things on with a feature flag and watch, you know, GitLab's engineering team give you the feedback that you need to hear. I suppose is maybe the
right,
way
yeah,
to phrase it. I think it is interesting that I think you know one of the things that um we keep talking about like the flow of a review, and we're working on the new job to be done canvas thing as well, is like maybe it makes sense to sort of like spend more time, you know, when Ben's back, getting that refined to a point where where we're comfortable with what we think the ideal like flow of a couple rounds of a review is. Like I create an MR, I ask you to review it, you give feedback, I make changes, you review it again. Like what are those 3 or 4 interactions? And then sort of like reapproaching it from um like what are the changes we need to make to the layout. I think, ultimately the goals are very is still that like we've got this problem with there's too much information and no way to tell you where you need to go to do whatever you need to do. So like largely that's where like the restructuring stuff originated, is that like it's just how do we move things around to make it more coherent. And maybe the comments tab isn't the right answer, but yeah, I think that makes sense. I think, it's I'm I'm optimistic to hear that you're thinking that way and like have those questions. And I think you're meeting with Pedro, so that's good. So like I think I would say it's fine to keep pushing in that vein, and like um let's just make sure that we're you know documenting the feedback, we're providing it in issues and epics, so we can like have that conversation and make sure we engage appropriately there. Because I think um there's an expectation that we do something, because clearly the merge request doesn't work today, or works, but has some problems. And so, it's striking the right balance of what that work is important.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Well, I didn't have anything else, but that feels like a good start for, I don't know, 30 days in or so. So yeah, I would say feel free to just like keep looping me in and bringing these things up. Um, I definitely don't think anything that code review has said we want to do is set in stone. It's the plans that we had at the time, given what we knew. And I think, we should be open to challenging those and making sure they're the right thing. So feel free to keep doing that.
Sounds good.
Awesome. It was good to see you. Good to see you too, Amy. Have a good rest of your day, everyone.
Okay, see ya. You too.